Welcome to Feedstuffs 365 and National Hog Farmer. I'm Ann Hess. U.S. pork exports have grown significantly since 2010, rising more than 50% in volume and 60% in value. As the 2021 year-end export data was released this week, we see U.S. pork once again bringing home the bacon, with a record $8.1 billion in export value. Joining us today to discuss the report highlights and outlook for market development are Brett Stuart, co-founder at Global Agri-Trends, and Dr. Clay Eastwood, Director of International Market Development for National Pork Board. Welcome, Brett and Clay, and thank you so much for joining us here today.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yes. Brett, let's begin today's conversation with you. The 2021 report shows a 5% increase in pork export value over last year. I know for American agricultural exports overall, China was once again the top export destination with a record $33 billion in purchases. How did U.S. pork exports fare in that equation, and what other destinations can be credited with taking the lion's share of U.S. pork over the last year?
Great question. China is the consummate riddle, right, for us in agriculture of trying to understand. It's a massive market. It's very non-transparent, opaque, difficult to know what exactly is going on. They went through a massive swine cull in 2019, 2020, where they ended up culling more than half of their swine herd over African swine fever. That led to hyperinflation. That led to surging exports and into China. And then we went into 2021 where we saw somewhat of the inverse of that happen. We saw Chinese hog prices fall by roughly 2/3 in value from January 1. And so as that market collapsed, it was due to excess supplies, heavy production, and the demand for imported pork fell sharply. So you mentioned the ag export number, 33 billion to China. It's absolutely huge and incredible. It really is a credit to the phase one agreement. And I know we didn't reach those purchase commitments, but it's incredible to see that much agriculture go. On the pork side, our exports to China dropped in tonnage by about 45% to China. So we had a minus 45%. Yet in tonnage to the world, we only had a 2% decline. Well, 3%, decline for the year. And so how do you do that? How do you have China drop 44% and only have a 3% decline? We had Mexico increase 31%. And so as China declined, we sent more pork to Mexico. We were able to offset most of that loss. And even though on a tonnage basis, we saw exports decline last year, it was the second highest year ever for pork exports. When we look at the numbers, it's really incredible. We exported $61 of export value per head on our hog slaughter last year. And so great value across variety meats across the spectrum.
Let's talk specific pork products. Mexico, for example, has long been a leading destination for U.S. hams and picnics. And U.S. Meat Export Federation over last year has been placing particular emphasis on the promotion of loin cuts as a center of the plate option. Where did we see that growth in 2021 in terms of chilled pork, muscle cuts, variety meat?
Yeah, good question. The vast majority of our pork leaves the country frozen. The two exceptions would be Mexico and Japan. We send some very high value pork to Japan chilled. And surprisingly, it can make that journey across the Pacific just barely. And logistics have not made that easy this year. Our pork into Mexico is a chilled pork market as well. And so that Mexican market grew, Japan grew. Our offal exports declined somewhat to China due to that slowdown, but we continue to derive fantastic value out of our offal exports. Other meats, cured, processed, we've seen good growth in some niche markets around the world. The great thing about the export market is it is so diverse. And you talk about, loins to Mexico. I think that's a great opportunity. We've seen loin prices very competitive over this year, and I think there'll be an opportunity for that. But you look at the diversity, we can find someone to buy pretty much every cut. There's someone around the world that wants that cut. And the good news is the U.S. pork is some of the most affordable pork on the planet.
Clay, let's turn to you. How does the 2021 report stack up with National Pork Board's international market efforts over the last year?
Yeah, so I think a key piece of this, and you've heard Brett say this word a few different times already, but diversity and diversification is absolutely a part of our strategy. And from a collaborative industry perspective, the strategy that USMEF, our key partner, as well as our partners at the National Pork Producers Council and even USDA's Foreign Ag Service, as we think about some of the additional funds that we've been able to secure that support those investments. But diversification is absolutely our strategy, and it's shown over the last couple of years that it is in fact paying off. You heard Brett say that China has dropped off significantly, but we've been able to offset a lot of that drop and the those losses per se by the increased focus on diversifying our portfolio and putting some of that focus onto these other more emerging markets around the world.
You mentioned your partnership with USMEF and Foreign Agricultural Service to maximize those pork marketing efforts abroad. How did Pork Board's investment, research, and partnerships help boost 2021 export figures? And what were some of those success stories over the last year?
Yeah, we've done this in a few different ways over the last several years. The first of which being some of the market assessment work that we've done. So now that includes, market assessments in China, Vietnam, Philippines. And I wish I could say we knew that, what ASF was going to do for global meat trade. But those insights have been really key as we think about just the shifts that we've seen, and not only pork, but also just protein trade around the world. But last year, we also did what we've called a U.S. pork differentiation study, where we looked at what are some of the key elements in 6 of our, big markets for U.S. pork. What are the key elements that we can really think about as an industry and packers and traders and exporters about how we really differentiate ourselves from our competitors? Things like sustainability and service and consistency. These are things that really started to come up in a lot of these key markets for U.S. pork. And so as I, look back to producers in the industry, it's how do we better share our sustainability story? Because producers and farmers are doing a wonderful job of producing a high quality, safe, and sustainable protein. And so better sharing that story with our consumers and customers around the globe.
Absolutely. Brett, let's talk about 2022 market outlook. I listened to you virtually last month at the BAMP Pork Seminar when you discussed global risks, everything from African swine fever and Prop 12 to fertilizer prices and labor issues. With this report in hand, what do you see some areas for growth for U.S. pork, and what will be some challenges on the horizon?
Well, you mentioned all of the things that fog up my crystal ball. There is a lot of uncertainty as we go through into 2022 regarding everything you mentioned: African swine fever, Prop 12, labor, logistics, some real challenges. I think as I look into the opportunities for U.S. pork overseas in 2022, I think the opportunities are still good. We're going to see higher prices globally on pork. The question is, how do consumers respond to that? We've seen a significant increase in retail prices here in the US this last year. We're now seeing the pork complex start to inflate, and that's good news because it brings in profitability. The question is, how do we compete on overseas markets? The good news is we start 2022 with fewer sows in the world than we had a year ago. And that's just simply due to the China decline. It's due to financial losses in Europe, in Brazil. We've just seen a global contraction of the swine herd. And so that sets us up for optimism into 2022. Export market opportunities. I think Mexico is going to continue to see growth. We're going to continue to export more pork to Mexico. I think that's a great opportunity for us. Beyond Mexico, if I look at the top 8 markets for U.S. pork, they buy 88% of our tonnage. The remaining 12%, if I look at that market, and we'll just call it the lesser market or the others market, that others market has grown by 500 million pounds in 5 years. That's a growth market. And so I've picked that apart a little bit. If you look at our free trade agreements in Latin America, which includes the CAFTA-DR agreement, it includes Colombia, Chile, Panama, and you add those countries up, those countries have a population of 128 million combined. That's basically the same as Mexico. Mexico's 131. Now I look at pork exports to those markets, and keep in mind the CAFTA agreement that was signed 16 years ago was signed with 15-year phase outs on the quotas. So we can do the math. But those collective Latin American FTA markets bought about 600 million in US pork in 2020. 2021, they jumped nearly 50% to almost 900 million. I think that Latin American market for our free trade agreement partners could be $1 billion market this year. And I think that's one of the key growth markets that we need to keep an eye on.
Clay, I know Pork Checkoff's international efforts we've been discussing today have been in diversifying market cuts and differentiating from competitors. Are those still going to be key priority areas in 2022? And what are their next market opportunities Pork Board is hoping to seize upon over the next year, specifically like Latin America, as Brett mentioned?
That absolutely is the strategy going into 2022 and beyond. You just heard Brett say that there's a big opportunity in markets like Central and South America, and so we would be crazy not to capitalize on those opportunities and put some focus into those markets. Not to say we forget about a Japan or a Korea or some of these other really key markets for U.S. pork that are really high value. But as we think about, not only diversifying the markets themselves, but the cuts within a market, and Mexico has been a great example of that. And the work that we've done with bone-in pork loins and trying to create new and different business for U.S. pork in a historical ham-driven market. And so that is very much the focus for the checkoff. And the diversification of the international portfolio represents just under about a quarter of the Pork Board's budget. And so it is absolutely a growth and a focus area for the industry and for the pork checkoff, as well as our partners. I think in addition to the strategy and the focus, we're looking at some other insights that we might be able to glean from some of these newer, more emerging markets, and how we can better, set up U.S. pork for success in some of these newer markets.
Do you think we'll continue to see opportunities globally for U.S. pork at the meat case with dining at home, or do you think consumers worldwide are just ready to get back out in restaurants? Clay, let's start with you.
I think that people are, ready to get back to business and get back to traveling, and everybody's just ready to get back out there. The other key part of this, and I hear this from USMEF on a daily basis, is the way people are buying goods and protein and meat, and the way that they consume all of these things is a lot different than it was a couple of years ago. And so I know USMEF has placed quite a bit of focus on the e-commerce sector and how social media plays into all of this going forward. And so it's really changed the way we've had to think about marketing and how we reach consumers and customers. And so it's a different world, but I think it's just going to be a more well-rounded look at how we do business going forward.
Brett, are you hearing the same or have the same outlook on that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah, COVID has been immensely difficult, right? And frustrating on a scale that's hard to even explain. But I think with what we see around the world, especially with the recent drop in cases, and it's not just in the US, it's around the world. We've seen a sharp drop in COVID cases across Asia, across Europe. I think to your point, consumers are ready to get out and go back to restaurants and travel. I'm optimistic that we're going to see a lot of that open up and resume this year. And I think we're going to see a return to travel and restaurants globally.
As we wrap up here, a question to both of you. As we hopefully leave the pandemic area and soon enter the endemic area, as Brett mentioned, what were some key takeaways for you from our export growth over the last 2 years? And what lessons do you think we can apply going forward when marketing our quality pork products to consumers worldwide? Brett, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I think we've got to be vigilant in our marketing efforts, in our market access efforts. Those are the two key conditions that grow our export markets. And this industry is fortunate. I mean, we have fantastic tools for that. Between the U.S. Meat Export Federation, their overseas employees, they're fantastic. We have the ability to promote. We have the ability to reach out right to those end users and build value. But it's a very competitive world out there, and it takes a lot of competitive effort and promotional effort. On the other side, we need market access. And that's a continued fight around the world of being able to have that access. I mentioned the CAFTA agreement and what that's done. You know, it took 15 years to really reap the benefits of that as we see those quotas come off. But it takes time to really do that. There are concerns, you know, African swine fever is a huge concern globally, and here in the Western Hemisphere, that could have a major impact on market access were we to find a case in North America and even in the US. And so the key to me, I think we're set up well in this industry. We have all the tools we need to succeed in the export markets and global markets. It's a matter of just continuing the cause and keeping the momentum we have and being vigilant and diligent in those efforts.
Clay, how about you? Do you want to weigh in here on lessons Pork Board has taken from the last 2 years of the pandemic and what we can do going forward?
You know, I think Brett really hit the nail on the head, and it's really a lot of key things that have to come together to continue to develop and expand our opportunities for U.S. pork globally. But the other piece of it, and I think we've really seen over the last couple of years, is that not only domestic consumers, but international and global consumers are hungry for protein, and the U.S. pork industry is very well positioned to help meet that need. And so I think that's, you know, a key message back to producers is that folks around the world are really hungry for the protein that they produce. And, you know, the U.S. pork industry has a great story to go along with that.
Dr. Clay Eastwood, Director of International Market Development for National Pork Board, and Brett Stuart, co-founder at Global Agri-Trends. Thank you so much for your time today. For you and our audience, we thank you for tuning in. Be sure to join Pork Checkoff's webinar, U.S. Pork Exports and Market Outlook, tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. Central. Brett and Clay, along with Courtney Knupp, Vice President International Market Development for Pork Board, and Steve Meyer, economist with Partners for Production Agriculture, will discuss the 2021 year-end export data and share a pork industry economic update. Also, join us next Tuesday here on Feedstuffs 365 at 1 p.m. Central to discuss how the beef industry can lead the evolution from commitment to action when it comes to sustainability. Joining us is Elanco Animal Health's President and CEO, Jeff Simmons. For Feedstuffs 365 and National Hog Farmer, I'm Ann Hess.